All right, guys, this is Norfolk Central coming back at another YouTube video. Man, it's my second day in a row. It feels great to be back. Be sure to check out my recent video that I just did yesterday in talking about just different things with the Florida State football season and things to monitor for this upcoming year. Let's go ahead and talk about some underrated players that I'm ready to see this season. I think it's really important because a lot of fans are talking about the Ashton Daniels and the Usman Chromas and the Deuce Robinsons and even the Mandrell Sears and stuff like that, even Chris Jones at the linebacker position. There's so many good pieces that fans are talking about. But let's talk about some of those guys that not many people are talking about. Obviously, Florida State went through a rough season last year. They went 5-7. The year before, they went 2-10. It's not been a great time in Tallahassee. Mike Norvell has kind of had the fan base in a great position in 2023. They got snubbed away from the playoffs, and now you're trying to figure out different pieces to kind of get back to where you were in the 22 and 23 season. But now you're getting to a point now where it kind of sucks because you're wanting to see Florida State be successful. This is the ACC that they're playing in. This is not just some SEC or Big Ten conference. This isn't the super conference that they're trying to make up in college football nowadays. The ACC is very winnable. You just saw Miami go to the national championship game against Indiana and basically compete at a high level. And we never thought Miami was going to be relevant again. Now, obviously, NIL, the different kind of payments and stuff like that kind of come into play. And you know how Miami is with their payments and everything like that. Their fan base might not show up for home games, but surely enough, they do have enough money to be able to kind of compensate for that, as you're seeing with Darian Mensah coming into this season. I just think there's a lot of things that Florida State's got to work on. But if they have a couple of these underrated guys that I'm about to discuss, it could be a really good season for Florida State. Let's go ahead and talk about the first one. It's going to be wide receiver Javon Boggs. I think that's a big thing. Boggs was a talented recruit, four-star prospect coming out of Cocoa. I think this is a guy that Florida State really liked. He was Mr. Florida 2 years in a row. Was a guy that Florida State was really high on, excited for. Deuce Robinson even talked about him being an NFL receiver. And you know what he did? He had 9 receptions for 103 yards and a touchdown. That's it. That's all he had. Now, the good news is this is something that you can kind of lean to. Even though the injuries were a concern for him going forward, he had 4 receptions and 56 yards against NC State. Now, obviously, we lost that NC State game. You saw how that factored in, and it was just a struggle, to say the least. You even see Lil Wayne McCoy, that was also having a great moment in that before he transferred over to Louisville this offseason. But I do think Florida State can have some success with him. Problem is, you have a loaded receiver room. I think this is probably one of the better receiving rooms that Mike Norvell has had, and that's including when he had Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson in the same room together. But you had Deuce Robinson, you have Kai Danzy, then you also have a Devin Carter, a Jason Lopez. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, and Boggs is just kind of that forgotten guy almost. Even a Gelsey, I think, is a big get for Florida State. He's kind of that hybrid tight end wide receiver mix. He's the big body receiver that you can kind of get on the outside of the field and maybe even get a couple of red zone targets. I definitely think Florida State's got a talented group of wide receivers, but I think Boggs can carve a role for himself if he really puts in the work and he stays healthy. The second guy, this is a guy that not a lot of people are talking about. They're talking about his brother, Mandrell Desir, but Daryl Desir is going to be a guy that I'm super excited about watching this season because they didn't just pay Mandrell to come back to Florida State. They also paid Daryl. This is a big get for Florida State to bring him back in the defensive line. He had a decent season, 23 tackles and 1 sack. He just wasn't a freshman All-American. But you have to think, Mandrell come on later in the season, having 5 sacks in 6 games to end the year. That was huge for Florida State to have that production from him, to have something to sell for your defensive line because, let's face it, some of the defensive end transfers that you brought in, like a James Williams, even a Deontay McCray that's going to be coming back this season. Diamante Diggs is another guy that was kind of a bust. Jason Jenkins is another one also that they didn't really have too many factors with. I just thought that Daryl Desir actually had some bright, shining moments. He had 7 tackles against NC State. Then he turned around and had 4 tackles against Florida. I think you're seeing the potential that he might have in this defense. And I could see Mandrell and Daryl both being able to play on opposite sides of each other at the defensive end spot. The one bad thing is that you can say about Mandrell that you can't say about Daryl is that Mandrell can play defensive tackle and defensive end. I think Daryl's more of a primary defensive end, but I do think he's a very talented get. Now, coming into the offseason of last year, Tony White actually talked about how the Desir twins were going to be big factors in what Florida State was going to do. The fan base laughed at everybody because the Desir twins were 3-star prospects. We all know how everybody is about Mike Norvell and his 3-star prospects and his 3 stars with hearts and everything like that. But the one good thing is Florida State is turning out and trying to develop those guys that they have in the defensive line room. Now, the other factor is too, you brought in 8 defensive linemen in this 26 recruiting class. So you really need to figure out what you're going to have on that defensive line. Is it going to be a Kevin Wynn that's going to step up as your defensive tackle? Are you going to have a Rylan Kennedy? Are you going to have a Mandrell Desir in that starting lineup? Are you going to have a Daniel Lyons who they think is really taking a step forward with his leadership abilities? I just think that you're going to still see Daryl Desir pop up quite a bit, and I wonder how much factor he's going to be in with this. Because if you're able to slide even a Mandrell in and out and being able to kind of be versatile and not really taking those defensive linemen out when they're hot, but if Daryl gets hot at the right time, I really think he can be a special guy. And, you don't just pay a large sum of money to both the Desir twins just for one of them to play and not the other one. So I do think that this is going to be a prime opportunity for Daryl to take advantage of this, and I really love his chances at Florida State's defense in 2026. Now, let's go ahead and go to the last guy, Quindarius Jones. Yes, you've heard it many times before. This is a Mike Norvell 3-star special out of the state of Mississippi from a while back. I think this is a guy that's been through a lot at Florida State. The problem is last year he only had 7 tackles and 1 pass deflection before he suffered a season-ending injury. It was a big loss for Florida State because even though Quindarius Jones has not done a ton of things at Florida State, he has had some flashes in what you've wanted him to be in the defensive backfield. Problem is, you have so many defensive backs in this system that you really don't know what you're going to have. Nehemiah Chandler comes to mind as a guy that they're going to really be proud of this offseason. CJ Richard. And then you also got some returning guys like Ashlyn Barker and also Jarrell Rawls, I think is a big factor too. Even a guy like Trey Bell, who's a true freshman that I think is going to be really factored into everything that's going on at Florida State. There's a lot of guys in that defensive backfield. And what you're going to have to see is some guys step up in that defensive backfield because you don't have a Patrick Surtain anymore. You need to figure out other pieces that are going to be in that defensive backfield. You got a new coaching staff with Blue Adams, and then you also have Evan Cooper as well. But I do think Quindarius Jones is going to primarily be a cornerback in this system. But I just wonder what's going to happen if he's going to be able to stay healthy, be consistent, and be that guy that Florida State needs, specifically as a senior coming into his last year. A lot of times you're seeing with some of those guys, even at Nebraska, where Tony White's defense in the second season was a big factor in what they do in terms of being guys together and really getting home on this defensive scheme and learning it very, very well. And Florida State's definitely going to need that if they're going to have a productive season this year in 2026. But I really appreciate all the love and support. I'm going to continue to churn out these YouTube videos as we go on and get closer to the season. Try to get my goal of being monetized again on YouTube and kind of getting back in the swing of things. I have a Instagram account at Norvell Central that's got almost 32,000 followers. I also have one on my Twitter account that's got about 12.5 followers. Facebook, I got about 6,000. It's in Norvell Central as well. And then I have a TikTok that I'm desperately trying to get up. I haven't had it for that long, but maybe it's about 1,000 followers also. I just think that I'm trying to get as much social media platform and as much attention as I can to all these different platforms. Because let's face it, Florida State's not had a whole lot of positive energy. I've been a season ticket holder for a very long time at this point, and I know that I'm very passionate about Florida State and what it brings together. I just want to bring positive energy to this fan base once again, and hopefully we can be able to pan this out. I know everyone's disappointed with Mike Norvell. I know that some people want him even fired at this point, but I know that I want to see him be successful. I want to see Florida State be successful again, hoist that championship trophy, and let's get back to business. So I hope everyone has a great rest of the day, and be sure to comment your 3 guys that you think is very underrated for this season, because I am super excited to see what these 3 guys do. And as always, go Noles.